Please join me in welcoming Amazon CEO, Andy Jassy. Well, Andy, we are really excited to welcome you to our third Climate Pledge Summit.
It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and this is your first Climate Week experience.
It is.
So we're really excited to have you here in New York. And we were going to start with a few quick questions just to have the audience get to know you a little bit better.
Okay. Be careful what you wish for.
And so you're from the East Coast and back in New York here. So big sports fan, and how's it be to be back in New York right now?
Oh, I love New York. I mean, my intention when I got out of school was to be here forever. In fact, when I was leaving graduate school in Boston in 1997, my wife and I agreed that we'd move to she's from the West Coast. We agreed we'd live there for 2 to 3 years, and then we'd move back to New York City. We agreed to this on a napkin in a bar in the spring of '97, and that was 27 years ago. So she has since informed me that the statute of limitations on that napkin has run out. But it's, but I love New York City. It's great to be here, and the energy is amazing. There's just no city like it.
Yeah. Are you still keeping up with any of the New York sports teams?
Yeah, very much. Yes. I'm kind of a sports fanatic. Big Giants fan, I'm a big Rangers fan, a big Knicks fan, a big Mets fan. My dad grew up a Brooklyn Dodger fan, so he taught us to dislike the Yankees, which, by the way, if you're from New York and you don't like the Yankees, it's a bummer. It's the most successful sports franchise of all time. But of course, our Mets are right in the thick of this playoff hunt, and the Giants play the Cowboys tonight on Thursday Night Football, our Thursday Night Football. And then, in Seattle, I've become a pretty big Seattle Kraken fan, and I think it's kind of amazing what's happening at the Climate Pledge Arena, which is our arena out there, which is the most energy-friendly arena in the world. Yeah. All the ice is made from actual rainfall that we capture, and so it's kind of it's a cool story.
Yeah, and it's a great place to see a game, a concert, any of that.
It really is.
It's been so fun to have that in Seattle. I loved it. Also big into music, right? Almost went into that industry, studying music management. But any memorable concerts here in New York?
Oh, so many. I mean, when I was leaving school, the alternative I was most seriously considering, other than Amazon, was I was managing a band in Boston at the time, and I had this idea I'd written a field study on a music management label idea, and so my alternative was I was maybe going to go start that, and then reality set in that I owed a lot of money for school and might be able to learn something somewhere else. And so, but I would say maybe the most memorable show I can remember here was August of '92. I went to a Black Crowes show at the Beacon Theater. It was so hot that if you actually brushed against somebody even a little bit, you got like a full arm of sweat. And it's the only show I've ever been to where it felt like the entire audience went out together afterwards. There was this bar close to the Beacon that everyone seemed to go out to. It was just so communal and so festive, and it was memorable. That's
really fun. I just saw a video the other day of a whole bunch of people singing in the subway. It's kind of New York. Yeah. You get those New York moments. They're really fun, right? Really fun. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit back to Amazon. You've been with Amazon 25 years.
27.
27. Yeah. Okay. And 3 as CEO.
Yep.
And so maybe just lead us through, top of mind for you, kind of what are you thinking about what's Amazon been up to?
Yeah.
Particularly in your CEO tenure.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time for all of us, as you know, and the team, and it was an interesting time to start. If you go back to 2020, we grew 40% year over year on a $245 billion revenue run rate basis. It's just very unusual, as everything was shut down, and we were really the only ones, one of the only ones supplying retail items to folks in the middle of the pandemic. And it meant that we had to grow much faster than we ever intended. So we doubled the size of the fulfillment network that we'd built the first 25 years of our existence. We doubled it in 18 months. And then we built out a last mile transportation network the size of UPS in about 20 months. We had anticipated doing that over 6 to 8 years, but we needed to do it much faster to serve customers. And so when you make that much change in that short a time and you scale that way, it turns out you end up with a really different network. Because if you zoom out on what our fulfillment network is, it's a bunch of buildings and facilities that have to be connected together as nodes. And we had a very different network, and it took us time to optimize that network. And so our cost to serve in our operations area was much higher in 22 than what we wanted. And I remember during that time, it was obviously a lot of work for the team, and we were all feeling it. And a lot of people said, boy, that was a tough time to start in the gig. But I really feel like I'm going to look back on it and feel like it was a great time to start, because what it did was it allowed us to really reevaluate all of our most closely held beliefs about how to organize a fulfillment network, and we completely re-architected how we thought about it. And the biggest change that we've talked a lot about was regionalization, where we took a largely flat network in the US and regionalized into these 8 hubs. And the idea, along with changing all our placement algorithms, was to get items closer, in facilities closer to end users. And what that did was it got items to customers much more quickly. So we've been shipping faster than we ever have the last couple of years. It lowered our costs, but also was great for the environment. I mean, with what we changed there, we saved about 16 million miles that we would have otherwise had to travel and go just last year alone. So, you know, that was a big deal, and I think we've made a lot of progress. I think at the same time, if you look back at before the pandemic, most companies were on a march to modernize their infrastructure and their technology infrastructure and move from on-premises technology infrastructure to the cloud, because it's more cost effective, you can innovate at a much faster clip, and you get much better developer productivity. And then the pandemic happened, and everybody kind of went home and was fighting for survival. And then 22, the economy seemed very dicey, and so every company was trying to figure out a way to cost optimize, ourselves included. Yep. And what's happened is, as you've emerged from that period of time, is that you see the duality now of most companies going back to trying to figure out how to take that low-hanging fruit of moving their infrastructure from on-premises to the cloud. And then, of course, most companies are very excited about the advent and the evolution of what they can do with AI. And so we see all of those pieces as well. I'd say that kind of the third thing is just we have a number of really big, new, significant investments that we're making and bets that we're really excited about. And there are too many to mention, but if you look at what's happening in our Prime Video business, you know, the combination of the shows continuing to get much better, what we've done with sports, the partnerships we have with third-party media providers as part of channels to give our customers selection. We're building what we think is the world's best collection of streaming video items for people to consume, and I'm really pleased with how that continues to grow. You know, we are building a low Earth orbit satellite in Kuiper. We're working to try and improve the healthcare situation here in this country. And, you know, and then I'd say that the last thing that we're spending a lot of time on is just, if you have a culture that matters to your success and to your customer experience like we do, you know, it's not your birthright to continue to have the culture be strong in the way you want it. You have to keep working at it all the time. And so the team and I spend time on that as well.
Yeah, just a few things.
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah. No, thanks for that overview. I think it's so interesting. I mean, it's a place where I know, I mean, in the last decade, I'm learning every single day. It's just an amazing place. There's so much going on. So just kind of moving to the topic of the day and sustainability, among all those priorities in different areas that you described, thinking a little bit about how you view sustainability and how we think about leveraging Amazon's size and scale and thinking about keeping sustainability as a priority. Maybe just share a little bit with us about how you view it and keeping it as a priority among all of that.
Well, it's incredibly important to the team and to me. And you know, if you want the planet to be inhabitable for our kids and our kids' kids, we have to make changes, and it's a big piece of why we've been trying to do so. It turns out, of course, most people care about this, our customers care about this, our partners care about this, our employees care about this, and so we've been working really hard over the last many years to incorporate changes into how we operate to be more environmentally friendly, and along with taking the climate pledge, as many of you here have done, to be net zero carbon by 2040. And you can see it in a bunch of areas. If you look in our AWS business, we committed to being 100% renewable energy by 2030, and we made it by 2023. By the way, if you look at the cloud, this is something people sometimes get confused about. The reality is that moving to the cloud is 4 times more energy efficient than running on premises, because most companies who have on-premises infrastructure run at utilization of about 10 to 20% of all those assets, but in the cloud you run at several times higher utilization. So, if you look in our retail business, our stores business, we have 24,000 EVs on the road today, with a commitment to do several tens of thousands more. We have the largest private charging network in the United States that we've built for our broad fleet of electric vehicles. If you look at what we've been doing with plastic, we've removed 95% of the plastic air pillows in North America. We already are 100% in Europe, and we'll get to 100% in North America this year. We eliminated 446,000 metric tons of packaging in the last year alone, a few million since 2015, 43% less packaging by weight in our shipments since 2015. So quite a bit of work that we have been working on across our different businesses. And the reality is that if we want to get to our collective goal, and this is why we have so many signatories and people participating, it doesn't work if just one company gets there. We all have to do it together. There's a lot of invention left to happen. We're trying however we can to share what we know. We launched this Amazon Sustainability Exchange, which is really a website that has, kind of a playbook and methodologies and best practices, and we'll share whatever we know to get there together, but we're working hard at it.
Yeah. I just want to say, these facts aren't on a screen anywhere, so that's really impressive that you.
Well, it matters, as you know, it matters to us.
It matters to us a lot, but it's a really impressive level of knowledge, I think, and just it shows a commitment really from the top. And I think maybe just talk a little bit more. You mentioned the 100% renewable energy. That's a path we've been talking about for a long time. We've been putting a lot into. Maybe just say a little bit more about some of the drivers behind that one, because that's been such an interesting thing to be a part of, and we've been working so hard at that for so long.
Yeah, there's so many things that we're working on here. Just first, we have funded and driven hundreds of these solar and wind projects. That if you look at collectively, it's about it's enough to fuel 7.6 million U.S. households. So it's hundreds of these projects. We've been the largest corporate renewables purchaser for the last 3 years, and I expect that to be the case for several years to come. And it's important to our business, it's important to our partners and to our customers. There's a whole bunch of other things that we've been working on. We're advocating really hard for grid modernization. And there's a lot of places in the world where it's really carbon heavy, and so we're targeting a lot of our renewable projects in areas that are carbon heavy, so we can kind of change that mix and that equivalent. Wherever we can build sustainability practices into our construction, that's a big deal for us. Mm-hmm. A few other examples. We got about 5,000 buildings worldwide for Amazon. We're increasingly electrifying those buildings. We're trying to put electric-heavy trucks on the road. We're starting really in Southern California. I think if you want to get to carbon-free, you're going to have to invest in alternative energies. So if you look at, we have the first of its kind data center campus that's co-located with an existing nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. If you look at our device suppliers, we make a lot of devices. We're trying to help and push so that they have renewable plans. Those are all things that I think are really important parts of trying to get there. And it's not just one business or one company. We have to all do it together.
Yeah. And with all of that, and I think sometimes when we go faster, when we pulled that goal from 2030 to 2025, and then we did it in 2023,
yeah.
You know, we have this big goal out there, as do most of the people in this room, to be net zero by 2040. A lot of people say, well, why can't you get there by 2030? You're Amazon, go fast, speed your thing, speed and scale. So maybe talk about, you know, why can't we do it by 2030?
Well, I would say that if anybody has a really good plan on how we can get there by 2030 in a cost-effective way with enough of the innovation needs to happen to solve some of these problems, we are all ears. We're all interested in trying to get there as fast as we can. You know, I think that if you kind of get through all the hand waving and the announcements, it's a very different task to be a technology company and get to 100% net zero carbon than it is a company that does more industrialized operations. And so, you know, most of the technology companies have been working hard at renewable energy, and, you know, we just talked about we got there in 2023. But if you think about what Amazon does as a more industrialized company, you think about all the fulfillment centers we have, think about all the packaging we have, think about the last mile transportation, think about the middle mile trucking, think about the ocean freight and the air travel that we do. That is a very different equation and much harder to do. And so some of those issues, I think, are very successfully being worked. You know, renewable energies we talked about. I think we're on a very good path with EVs on last mile transportation. I think that there is no solve yet in the middle mile for all that trucking. And, you know, if you look at ocean freight, there is no solve there yet either. And, you know, if you look at the sustainable aviation fuel, which, you know, for air, it exists in small quantities and very expensive. You know, we all need something that's more cost effective. And packaging, we've made a lot of progress, as I talked about earlier, in packaging, but there's still a lot of invention to happen. So there is a lot of invention left to happen. We are doing a lot of it ourselves, but we're also working with a big partner community, many of you in here, and as well as a number of companies that we're trying to invest in too and work with to get there. But it's we will get there as absolutely quickly as we can, and if it was closer to 2030, that would be goodness, but it's not simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned so many of the businesses and industries that we're in. You've mentioned healthcare and devices and advertising and Amazon Web Services. And maybe if you could share with us a little bit more your views on, you know, how we balance customer centricity and that customer obsession with innovation and sustainability.
Yeah.
Your views on that.
Well, I think that you can't think of it as an or. It has to be an and. And I really passionately believe it can be an and that we can do both really well. Any of these things, it starts with having the will to do it. And I was listening to the last panel a little bit as I was waiting, and you know, it is true. Like, until you make the decision that you are going to do this, and it's not just making an announcement, you have to really organize around it. It's, you know, it's not simple to change a significant company and how you're operating. So I think really, you know, a number of things capped by the climate pledge in 2019 changed how we thought about it. But then you can have a climate pledge, but if you don't really have a plan together on how you're going to get there, and a plan that everybody's committed to, it sounds good, but it just doesn't happen. You can't wake up in the year 2038 and decide that you're going to make this happen, not at our scale at least. And so, as you know, we meet very regularly with your team, and when we meet with your team, it's not just me with your team, it's every single one of our senior leaders of the company. We have a team called the S team, which is, you know, a senior leadership team. Like, they're all in the room. They all have targets. They all have commitments. They all have to speak to the progress they're making or the progress they're not making. And, you know, when we announced the climate pledge in 2019, we didn't really have a plan on how we'd get there. We knew how we'd get a good chunk of the way there, but there were, you know, as I said, there's still a lot of innovation left to happen. Yep. But I think we've spent the last couple of years really refining that plan such that we have confidence that we're going to get there. And it's a lot of work left, but you know, I think you can't just say it. You have to have everybody taking targets and everybody committed, and then you have to have some kind of governance mechanism to get in the room and make sure you're making the progress you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll keep working that plan, and keep
Yeah.
getting more detailed.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And you mentioned earlier, I want to go back to, you mentioned AI. And so with the emergence of generative AI, of course, we know there's going to be huge opportunities, but there's also going to be some big demands on energy.
Yeah.
And so with the need for us to also serve customers and build more data centers, maybe you can talk a little bit about your views on that. And,
well, AI.
Explain some of our work too.
Yeah,
generative AI.
AI is, I think it's going to transform virtually every customer experience that we have in this world, and it's going to enable altogether new ones that we hadn't imagined. And it's funny, when you look at AI, most of the conversation has been about the applications, things like ChatGPT, which is pretty remarkable. But the way we think about generative AI is that there are these 3 macro layers of the stack, all of which we're very deeply invested in. At the bottom layer is really for those that are building models, which the thing that matters to those model builders is the compute to train and to run inference, which really the key is the chip, and then services that make it easier to build those models. And so, most of the chips, almost all the chips, have been supplied to date by really one company. And people want alternatives as well, and we have a deep relationship with that and partnership with that company, but people want alternatives, and they want chip options that are more price performant and more energy performant. And so we've been working for several years on our own custom silicon here. We have a training chip that we call Trainium and an inference chip that we call Inferentia, and those will be, I think, meaningfully more price performant than what's out there, and also more energy performant. I think that at that middle layer is really for companies that don't want to have to build their own frontier models. They want to leverage a frontier model, customize it with their own data, and then have modules to make it much easier to build a generative AI app. Because the reality is, to build a generative AI app, it's not just the model. You actually have to have guardrails so the model doesn't say something you don't intend it to say, and you have to you want to query for the latest information, you need RAG, and if you want it to take automatic actions for yourself, you need agentic capabilities. And so we built this service called Amazon Bedrock that has the largest selection of frontier models, but also the best features that let you build a high-quality generative AI app, and has a lot of traction. And then at that top layer are the applications. And ChatGPT is an example of that. We've built in AWS our own Gen AI-powered assistant for software development, which we think is the most capable, called Amazon Q. And but we also are building a whole host of applications inside our company. We have a shopping assistant called Rufus. We have an assistant for sellers called Amelia. We're continuing to revamp Alexa. So all 3 of those layers really matter. Now, people say, if AI is going to be such a big deal, aren't you worried about the power situation? Which, by the way, these models and these applications are very power hungry. And so, but there are things that we can do together. First of all, the first thing is, if you can't really take advantage of AI anyway unless your data is in the cloud. And moving to the cloud, as I said earlier, is 4 times more energy efficient than running on premises. So the first thing is that companies having their data in the cloud and running AI in the cloud will be more energy efficient. Second thing is the chips. The chips are such a big part of all these workloads. And so if you look at something like Trainium, it's about 30% more energy performant than the chips that everybody's using today. On the inference side, which are the predictions, Inferentia is about 50% more energy efficient than what's out there today. I think that's also something significant we can do. Finding alternative energy sources, like I was talking about, nuclear is another really important strategy. And then I think water is another piece. If you look inside our data centers, we have made a very significant investment over the last number of years to use more air cooling instead of water. In places like Sweden and Ireland, about 95% of the cooling comes from air as opposed to water. And we made this water promise of 2030, where we're going to contribute more water back to the communities than we consume ourselves, and we'll do this by providing more access to clean water, restoring watersheds, making sure that there's sanitized and clean water for people. And so those are all things that we can do. I think the other big thing that has to happen to be more energy efficient for AI is that the models and the inference have to get much more efficient than they are today. And There are a number of companies, including our own, that are working very hard on this. I have a lot of confidence that that's going to happen. It may not happen in a year or two. It may take 3, but we're all working very expansively on it, both because it's much better for the environment and just frankly, cost-wise, it really matters for companies that want to use AI at the scale that they intend to.
Yeah. It's been a big topic here at Climate Week, so it's really interesting and helpful. I think we'll continue to learn a lot there.
Yeah.
Another thing you talked about when you talked about our plan, and we know some of the ways, but some of the technologies are here but need scale, and some are yet to be invented. And one of the things we did in 2020 was to develop the Climate Pledge Fund, right? Our $2 billion fund where we're investing in those early stage technologies, and Amazon's a great place to trial and test some of those things across our network. So what's your view on how we should be thinking about climate solutions, and particularly for this audience is in so many different industries, about 59 different industries across the signatories. So maybe as a last question, and a hopeful one, when we think about all the technologies that are out there, how do you think about how we should all be thinking as pledge signatories about the new solutions to come, and what's ahead?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say thank you to all the signatories for your partnership and being with us on the journey here. It's not simple. I was talking to a partner that we work with in a bunch of areas of our business who is a big industrialized company, a very large enterprise, and I was talking to them about maybe joining the Climate Pledge. And he said, this CEO said to me, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to join because I have no idea how I'm going to get to net zero carbon. And I don't want to join if I have no idea. Which, by the way, I completely respect that perspective. It's not unreasonable. It's just not ours. And I think it's not this group in this room's perspective. I think putting a stake in the ground and deciding that you're going to use this as a forcing function, both because it's right for the world and for future generations, and because it's going to force activity in our respective companies, is a really important step. And I applaud all of you and thank all of you for being on this journey with us. I think that there's, if you want to actually get there, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of invention left to happen. And while all of us are working on that invention, we need a really broad ecosystem that's also focused on it. And it's part of why we built this $2 billion climate fund, and we've been funding companies for a while. And there's so many companies that are interesting in the fund, but I'll just try and mention a few. Carbon Cure is one that's interesting. They're working on decarbonizing concrete, which if you have a lot of buildings and you're putting up a lot of buildings like we are, is really a big deal. And we have about 40 buildings all over the world right now that's already using Carbon Cure, including our HQ2 in the Arlington area, where we're about 25% less carbon in those buildings that we've used Carbon Cure for there. Hippo Harvest is another startup that I think is pretty neat, and they're using plant technology and machine learning and robotics to build more environmentally friendly greens. Their green leafy lettuce is now sold by Amazon Fresh. It uses about 95% less water and 55% less fertilizer, and those are the types of, those are the types of solutions that change what's possible for all of us. The third one I'll mention is a company called Amogy. And what they're working on is they're trying to build alternative renewable energy, and they're really using ammonia to power to change transportation, particularly heavy transportation. The hope is that they're going to be able to be the energy underneath heavy cargo. And I think they just had their first test of this with a tugboat here in New York City last week, which was a successful test. But those are 3, I think, very interesting and exciting technologies and companies, but there's a large number of these. I have 2 kids. I have a 23-year-old daughter and a son who just turned 21 today. we surprised him last night for his birthday, and we were out. He wanted us to go with him for his first official drink at midnight. So I was.
He heard that.
Yeah, I was happy to do it, but yes. And we were in a bar with a bunch of his friends at close to 1 last night, and I was kind of struck by how many of his friends want to work on the environment. They're just so passionate about it. And I think that this is the beginning of an explosion of new technologies and new companies and new innovation that we should all be there to drive ourselves inside our companies, but also partner with these companies. It's going to help us achieve our collective goals. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, everyone in this room is excited about it, and I want to thank you for spending some time with us in a very busy week, but a very busy year, and thanks for your passion around this area. It's meant a lot to our path and our work at Amazon.
Yeah,
so thanks
thank
for
all of
joining
you.
us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.